Alright guys, so to begin the molding process, you first want to release the area around your sculpt. That way once you put the plaster on, it doesn't stick. Now, this when I sculpted this, I sculpted it on a piece of wood. I'm trying to keep this video just as normal, as realistic as possible. Normally, if I was actually doing a sculpt, I would actually do it on a life cast, either myself or someone else. That way, the appliance is already in the correct shape that I need it to be. So if this was an arm sculpt, appliance for an arm or a head, which it is, for me, I would normally sculpt it on a life cast of one of those, just because since the head it's curved, so the sculpture would have been curved. Not to say that it's like this is going to cause any problems, but it will cause a little bit of difficulty because again I'm sculpting this on a flat surface, so when I cast it, it's automatically going to be in a flat state, a straight, nice flat state, and so when I try to go apply it to someone, I will have to deal with a little bit of resistance from the appliance not wanting to curve, just because the surface that I sculpted it on wasn't curved. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But I just did it this way because I figure, not everyone has a life cast, or not everyone knows how to make one. But you usually have some type of flat surface that it's a throwaway that you can just grab and you can sculpt on. So that's why I chose the piece of wood to show this. So as I said, the first thing we need to do is release it. But let me go over our supplies first. What we need. So I just have a simple chip brush here. This is a little 2-inch. I ran out of 1-inch ones, or that's the one I would actually be using. But the 2-inch works just as fine. And these are little cheap little things. You can get these for like 90 cents, 80, 90 cents, Walmart. Or you can get them like in packs at Harbor Freight for just a few dollars. You need Vaseline or petroleum jelly, the exact same thing. This is just, as I said, the release agent, so the plaster will not stick to the wood when we start applying the plaster. And then you need plaster, obviously, and this is just the plaster that I purchased at Home Depot. They sell bags of plaster. I believe it was in the paint section, and it's was like $18 for a. I want to say it was like a 25-pound bag of plaster of Paris, but just a small little amount of plaster will do, because again this is just a small appliance, so it doesn't take anything a large amount. So I've just got that little cup full of plaster here, and I've got another cup here of just some water. Not very much. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but it's not very much at all. It's like up to here, so it'll be plenty for what we need just to cover this up. And the other thing is just stirring containers to mix the plaster in, and I just use these for small little appliances like that. I just use these little Dixie cups, because they're nice and cheap. They're throwaway, so these work out, perfect for these. And then it's like, if you can now for stirring the plaster and all that, I would normally use a popsicle stick. I don't seem to have any around me at this time, so I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna use one of my wood sculpting tools here, just to give it a quick stir. But normally I would use a popsicle stick, but I'll just use I use what I've got. Alrighty, so the first thing we need to do is we need to release the wood, because as I stated before, if I was just to place plaster right onto this, it would stick to this wood and I'd never get it off. Oh, and then the gloves, if you like to keep things neat and clean, again, you are working with a liquid, try to keep your area as neat as clean as possible. So I've got some gloves on here. I've also got plastic under my work area, so that way if any plaster does get on the work area, it's not going to damage it. So just be safe with that. So here we go. So we're just going to release the wood right now. I'm just going to get some on my brush here, and then I'm just going to release the board. Now don't worry about getting a little bit of Vaseline on your sculpt, but you don't want, you try to avoid not getting any on your sculpt, because what the Vaseline will eventually do, it'll actually fill up all your detail. So that's the main reason you really want to just avoid getting any Vaseline on your sculpt. But if you hit the edges a little bit with the Vaseline, that's not going to hurt anything. But you just want to make sure that you get that Vaseline all over your molding surface, just so you won't have any problems with sticking. Because there's nothing worse, and I tell you this from experience, there's nothing worse than going through the entire process of making a great sculpt, and then you go to mold it, and when you get done molding it, you try to open it, and the mold won't open. I mean, that is one of the most just heart-wrenching parts when you do that. So that's why you really want to, take your time, and you want to make sure you take all the steps you needed to make sure your mold's open. So gotta make sure that this is nice and released, making sure I get into the wood, because I don't want this sticking. And this goes for any surface that you sculpted this on. No matter what the surface, you want to release the area around it, especially if you do this on a stone surface. So as I stated, normally I would do this on a life cast of either myself or someone else, and those being stone or plaster, plaster will stick to plaster, so you definitely want to, in those situations, you definitely want to make sure you release it well. Okay. Now, one thing also you want to keep in mind is that if you've noticed, I haven't released the edges because I don't plan on letting any of the plaster get that far. And keep that in mind. It's like a lot of people will do that. They'll release the top front with the appliance, but then when they're in the process of molding, they'll just let the plaster just go all over and go over the edges and all that, and then you've just got not only a big mess, but you've got to get that plaster off those edges or try to break it or somehow, and it's just a big hassle. So do keep in mind that if you are working on stuff like this, that the plaster, if you're not comfortable, just go ahead and release the edges too. But I'm gonna have pretty good control over this. I'm not gonna plan on letting it droop over the sides. So that's good right there. If you when you are releasing it, if you do happen to get a bit of a Vaseline on the sculpt and maybe some detail, just go over it with a clean brush and just try to brush out that Vaseline to get it off the detail. But that looks good. Alrighty, our sculpt is all released, and next we will be mixing the plaster and applying it. Alright guys, so I'm going to try to do this as quick as possible. So since we have the board released, now I'm just going to take my little cup of water and I'm just going to add the plaster into the water and continue mixing it until I get to the consistency that I like. Now this one you really just do have to just mix it to what you feel comfortable with, but what you're looking for is in between like pancake batter and maybe a little bit thicker than that. You don't want it like too thick, but you don't want it too runny as well. You want to give yourself plenty of time to be able to work it into the sculpt. So let's go. Just gonna keep adding it and mixing. Depending on how much water you have, you might need a lot of plaster. So just keep adding the plaster in until you get the consistency that you're looking for. But don't add a huge amount at one time. Do it in very small batches, because you don't want to add a whole bunch of plaster to the water and all of a sudden it'd be too thick from what you need. Because once plaster starts setting up, it can go off pretty quickly. So just scrape the sides of your cup. Just make sure that you get all that stuff off the sides and the bottom. Keep mixing it. Still a little too runny for me. Keep mixing it. And that's all I'm doing is like I'm constantly scraping the edges, scraping the bottom, making sure there are no lumps in the plaster. Just need a little bit more. Okay. Just keep scraping. Okay, I like that consistency. So yeah, this is like pancake batter. Um, it's not completely, like soupy. So this will be a good consistency to work with for now, because remember, as it sets, it will get thicker. So that's why you want to always start with a thinner batch, and then as it dries. Uh, and I'm just using the paper towel just to clean my my stir with. Alrighty, so now I'm just going to take one of my cheap little paint brushes, and I'm just going to start painting it on, and trying to get all the detail. And I'm focusing right now on just getting it brushed and in all the detail. That's what I'm focused on right now with this first batch layer here. Just gonna get in all the detail, making sure I get as much all the detail as I can. And as I said before, I'm gonna try to keep it on the board. And I'm not going to try to make it as big as the board, because there's no need to. This is a small sculpt. So just going off the sides, going out a little bit from it is perfectly fine. Okay, so that's a good bit. So now I'm just gonna focus on just putting the making sure to put the plaster all on the sculpt, and just keep working it until it starts firming up. I'm just going to keep taking any plaster that's falling off. I'm just going to keep brushing it back up and onto the sculpt. Just making sure I get all that detail. I don't want to lose any of that detail if I can help it. Because obviously, you put a lot of work into it, so you don't want to lose all that detail that you work so hard on. So once I feel comfortable with the first coverage, then I'm just gonna start adding a little bit of plaster onto it. Start just covering it, trying to build up the thickness for the mold. And the thickness of the mold, yeah, it just depends on how thick you want it. With small little appliances like this, they don't require really thick molds. But if that makes you feel comfortable with it, that's fine. Because it's not the outside of the mold that you're worried about. You're worried about the inside. So if you want to make the mold thick and all that, go ahead. As long as you get that first layer of detail in. The one thing about thickness, you want it a little bit thick. Let me say that, because obviously you want it for strength. Now you might be asking, well, what about like burlap or anything? Do you need any of that? With a small little mold like this, you don't. If you're doing like really big molds, then obviously in those situations, yeah, you'd want to reinforce the plaster. So adding a little burlap to that would be good. But for small sculpts like this, These are going to be such small molds. There's really no need to, because the plaster will be strong enough itself. Alrighty. Well, guys, yeah, you just keep an eye on the plaster, and you just keep working it, and just keep adding it until the plaster starts getting thicker. And so this is still a little bit runny, so I'm just gonna keep working it, keep adding plaster to it until the plaster starts thickening up, and then I can start really getting the thickness built up. So I'll be right back. Alright guys, so the plaster is starting to thicken up a lot, so from here on you really do have to work fast with this, because the plaster will set up very quickly. So here I'm just worried about just getting the thickness built up to make it a strong a mold as possible for this, so that's why I'm just going to worry about getting it on. As you can see, it's thickening up quite a bit. Alrighty, and now I'm just going to put my brush in some water, so just so it'll clean that plaster off, just so I can save that for later. But now I'm just going to take my fingers. I'm going to start really getting in there and really try to start shaping this plaster a bit. I'm not looking for, you know, anything too pretty or anything. I'm just trying to get it on there. So I'm happy with how that that thickness is. But yeah, you just want to make sure you keep in mind that once it starts getting to this state, the plaster is going to start setting up pretty quickly. So I'm just going to try to just smooth out the sides here, because I've got the thickness that I need. Now it's just mainly just cosmetic looking, just to make it not only look good but be functional for me. I don't want any like really jagged edges on here, so when I'm holding it. The other thing is, with these types of molds, with any type of mold really, I like to try to make it to where when I cast into it, I can lay it down flat and it'll stand up on its own. So on the top here, I'm just going to flatten out the top. That way I'll be able to, you know, put it down, and it should be able to stand on its own. I'll go over here. Yeah. But and once the plaster reaches a certain consistency, that's when you want to stop. You don't want to work it too much, because then you risk damaging not only the mold, but you could end up damaging your sculpt too. So, but I think that's it, guys. I really like how that mold looks. You know, again, these are just small little appliance molds, so they don't have to be perfect, pretty, or whatever. But yeah, so that looks good. Okay. So that's it for the molding, and now I'm probably just going to give this a good 20-30 minutes to set completely, and then we can go ahead and try to open it. Now, another thing that I just remembered too is that I should have done it on this one as well. Is that to make it easier to get your molds off your sculpting surface, whatever it be. It's always good to put pry points in. So I should have done it in this one, but I didn't. But if I had just added a little like square piece of clay on the side or anything right here, just so that way when I put the plaster over it, once it's dry, I would have somewhere to get underneath it and be able to pry it up. So keep that in mind, guys. Is whenever you're making molds, when you can, try to remember, try to think ahead, and think of how are you going to open this mold once it's done. But I'm hoping I don't have much trouble with opening this. But we will see. We will see if the release works as it should, and hopefully I'll be able to pry this off. So I'm gonna let that set, let it dry, and then we'll see how it goes from there.